Pass it along to you next.
You're right.
Ready.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This meeting of the Finance Committee of the City of Pasco City Council will come to order pursuant to public notice. Kathy, would you call the roll, please?
Barstow,
Here.
Howe, Walter,
Here.
Okay, great. Does the administration have a agenda of items for us this evening?
Yeah,
Okay. I think the first thing,
sorry.
whichever order you'd like to go in, Jamie.
What was the first item on that agenda?
Internal control.
Okay, yeah, as you guys may recall, when the Charter Review Commission modified the charter, proposed amendment to the charter, and was approved by the voters, there was a requirement for a minimum of every 5 years for the city finance, or the city to undergo an internal control audit. We're a little confused exactly what was intended. I've met with our auditors, and let me introduce, we have Nick Chiswick and Andrew Parker from Julian and Group who can help us answer any questions. We're trying to get an idea of what exactly was intended and what is intended for us to do. As a part of any annual audit, we prepare narratives for all the major processes. So cash receipting, when cash comes in, it's literally a narrative that says, here's the process, the steps in the process, here's how we receive it, record it, receipt it, book it, deposit it, whatever, and how it's all processed. Then that documents our internal control processes. Now, part of that, then during the audit is the auditors go through and they walk through a number of transactions to make sure that they follow those steps. And if anything pops out, then they do greater testing and the like. And I won't take it away from you, but so the internal controls of the city are tested on as part of the annual audit. Now, they don't opine on them, they don't issue an opinion, and no audit opinion standalone for financial statements does. They can't guarantee internal controls. I mean, they audit them and they say they work, they look representative, but they can't say that they're foolproof, and we never let anything go through, being what it is. So with that, I mean, I guess I'll let these guys talk about, if you don't mind, how you do go through the internal controls and evaluate them and make sure that they're working appropriately.
Do you want me to step up?
Yeah, if you don't mind,
Sure.
she's gonna ask you for your name and address.
So basically, Jamie,
Sir, could you tell us your name
Yeah,
and your
sure.
business address, please? Thank you.
Nick Chiswick with Julian Group,
Thank you.
333 County Line Road, Westerville.
Thank you very much.
Sure. All right. So Jamie kind of hit it at the nail on the head. For the internal controls, first thing we do, we kind of sit down and make sure what controls are in place. If anything's new, we use that for our risk base when we actually do the audit every year. Then we kind of rotate areas of significance, maybe payroll or your enterprise receipt testing or something like that, and we'll test a sample of 25 to 40 typically transactions each year to test our controls. Other than that, that's about all the control testing we do. And like I said, that's done every year with the financial audit, and like Jamie said, we don't opine on it, we don't have an opinion because they're your internal controls. Every entity is different of what works and what doesn't work. If we find something not working, or if we have a recommendation, we will give that. If we find a lot of errors when we're testing internal controls, we can issue an actual significant deficiency or material weakness on your internal controls. But when we're talking about doing additional internal control testing, I guess we kind of want to know exactly what you're looking to get out of it and what you would like us to do. We can do some additional agreed upon procedures that would be in and above the audit, which would require another contract and things like that. If there's like a certain area you wanted us to test annually, kind of switch it up or however.
Well, have you read the charter provision we're talking about?
Not thoroughly, no.
It's 6.02E.
Okay.
So it says, the council shall provide for an independent internal control audit of all city accounts, which shall occur at least once every 6 years, and council may provide for more frequent audits. So my question to you, sir, is, does the word in the charter provision, the words internal control and audit are capitalized? Does internal control audit have some sort of, is that a term of art in your field? Does it mean something special to you?
No,
Todd?
I guess.
Mr. Walter?
You know, I was president of the charter review, and I spoke with other CPAs, and actually they told me that that does have a meaning to it, and that's why we utilized that term. So I guess I have a couple questions that I would want to ask you first, if that's okay, Todd. You mind if I move?
Oh, yeah.
I would want to ask you first, and then I can tell you what the committee was, what the purpose of that revision was. So when you say test your, whose controls are you testing? Your controls, the city's controls,
Six.
the city's controls?
Yes.
So when you test controls, and internally, the city, you know, as I understand it, there are standards. You know, there are recommendations, there are standards in the industry for municipalities and for private, you know, nonprofits. There, different controls are recommended. You know, for instance, the same person doesn't write the check, doesn't approve the invoice, and doesn't take and approve, say, an expense or something. That same person doesn't do that.
Right.
So if you saw that in a review or an audit, you would bring it to the city's attention
Correct.
and say, that's not a standard control. So that would be an example of what was a concern, would be that the right controls are in place, the right number of signatures on, for instance, checks,
Right.
the right number of differential in people that are gonna review an expense that comes in. And then on top of that, what I understand is there's a purpose for the internal control is that it's a little deeper look, I guess is the way I would explain it. You know, a typical city audit is going through there and they're checking the books. You know, what came in, did it get put into the ledger correctly at the right time, those kinds of things. So what the internal control audit would look at it and say, well, was the right, for instance, I'll use a bond, for instance. You know, was the bond calculated correctly initially? Was it stated correctly in the paperwork correct, you know, initially? And then was it followed correctly? So you're not overstating and you're not understating the city's position. So if you're telling me that you do that on a normal audit, I would be surprised that that's a normal audit of city finances. Maybe you do that, maybe you don't, I don't know. But the idea was that, you know, as you probably know, you read all the time about, you know, somebody who's been a financial clerk for 30-some years and is found to have embezzled $400,000, and nobody would have guessed it.
Sure.
So the idea was, and they had plenty of audits.
Right.
Plenty.
Right.
So as the committee was looking at and trying to improve the charter, this was an independent, every 6 years or so, and we picked 6 years because that was a turnover of a council, essentially, was that there was this higher level or more in-depth look into the city's controls of their finances. For each, we have several different, as you know, we have several different accounts that we keep, so that the city can be, and nobody is assuming that anybody's doing anything wrong here.
Right.
That is not the case whatsoever, and it wasn't the case with the committee. It was, we want to make sure that everybody has 100% ability to say, we've had this deeper look, we've gone in, we've looked at all the expenses, all expense checks, and we've looked at their receipts, and we've said, yes, we agree that they're handled correctly, and what has come in matches what goes out, and 2 people approved it, another person signed the check, whatever the controls are recommended or what are standards. That was the purpose of the and as I said, the CPAs that I talked to when I was looking into this explained to me that this was a term of art. This was a known, matter of fact, I spoke with a CPA today and asked him again, if this is brought up, will they know what this is? He said they should absolutely know what this means. So maybe it's a different word that you guys use than what these other people used, but does that make sense to you? Does that sound like something you guys have done before?
No, not 100% testing
Okay.
of anything like that. No, like
Just-
performance audit. No.
Just to follow off of what Mr. Walter's comment was, when I first came on council and we had the first audit, and I'm thinking that somebody with the green eye shade is gonna sit down and go through every single transaction in the ledger and make sure it's all, you know, but what I found out was, and I'm not saying this is bad, this is the standard in your industry, was that there's a spot checking. We picked an area, we looked at it in depth, but we didn't look at we didn't find anything wrong, so we went on to something else. We just sort of poked around, we didn't find anything bad, and so the auditors did not sit down and go through every single transaction and double check everything. So I think maybe that's what Mr. Walther's talking about, is that this envisions we're going to look at every single check that was written, every single transaction, every single thing that was done for whatever period this is. I don't know if this is gonna be for a 6-year period, a 6-year look back, or just a 1 year.
Just 1 year.
You know, that everything's gonna be checked out. I think that's what Mr. Walther's saying, is he was envisioning.
We didn't quite get to that level of everything, but we were saying, what we were talking about was maybe you pick all expenses are looked at. Every expense check that's written is looked at. And it's not a spot check, it's every one of them.
Okay.
So, but it's not necessarily every transaction that happens. You don't have to look at every insurance check that's written or whatever the case was. But it was more than that, Todd. It was making sure that the way we function is, the way we have our internal controls is standard in the industry. Now, obviously, we have 2 people in the finance department. You know, so a three-person system probably isn't going to be possible.
Right.
But it may be. You may say, well, you need to make it a 3-person, and maybe there's another person that has to sign the check or something, or it has to be a dual signature check. Whatever the case may be, that was our real it was all about being, able to prevent any type of potential fraud.
Sure.
That was one, and then the second part of it was that if there was a mistake or something made, we'd figure out how to catch it. I'm not saying there have been. I think our audits have come back with very good reviews. But if there was one, we would be able to find it and say, oh, that maybe is a bad way of doing that. We can fix that.
Right.
That's really the point.
The one thing about, if I could, audits and internal control, bear in mind that they when they do their sampling, they first start off with the big dollar items. So everything above a certain threshold, by default, all the big dollar transactions are tested just because of the nature of the impact. And then it's statistical sampling below there. And once, if they hit and they get a number of errors, or if there's an error, then they say, okay, we need to expand the sample because statistically within a certain sample you should have no errors or one error, whatever. But the concern would be, A, is the cost. The cost of any internal control or audit basically shouldn't outweigh the benefit, is one of the overriding concepts. We pay, what's our audit fee this year? It's like 17,000?
Probably about right.
So
I'm sure.
17,000 to audit, and I would have to imagine if they audited, let's say every expense transaction, we had like 38,000 expense transactions, so that you're getting pretty significant by the time it's all said and done. So that would be an agreed upon procedure we could have them do.
We have a charter provision that says we have to do it.
Have to do it, so
Every
regardless.
6 years, so it doesn't make it how expensive it is. We're gonna be like the IRS that spends millions and millions of dollars to collect hundreds of thousands of dollars, so there you
Well,
go.
and I would point out, that the reason why it was chosen to do 6 years, or some years in between there, could be 5, could be 3, whatever if the council felt something was amiss or needed to see something, they can call for it to be done.
Correct.
That was the reason why we didn't do it every year.
So is this a council's call? I just wanna make sure, I don't wanna
I think
not,
It's a charter provision that says that
is it the council that calls for this, or is it me? I don't
It
wanna
would-
miss
no.
doing something I'm required to do.
I think it's,
it says the council shall provide for an independent internal control audit of all city accounts, all city accounts.
So that's everything.
That's everything, which shall occur at least once every 6 years, and council may provide for more frequent audits as it deems necessary.
correct.
So, it's all city accounts have to have this, and it has to be done at least every 6 years. So, I think, the way I read this, it's very clear, we need to get, I think that the finance department, the administration need to get an estimate from you folks as to how much that's going to cost.
Let me just ask this, with that, what was just read, are you able to provide a scope of what that would be and what that cost would be? I know, and I think that's one of the purposes is trying to define what, if we're looking at every account, is that every
Every in every
transaction,
account.
Every receipt, every payroll account, everything like that, it would
You don't
be
know.
very consuming. I'd have to talk to the partners and get you a rough estimate, but I'm thinking weeks at least. And then to your
Well,
point.
the times, it's certainly the time and, time costing and scope of what it would be, so we know what we're doing, this as Todd just pointed out, this is something that council at some point within the next 6 years is gonna have to call for.
We don't have to do it this year because it's 6 years. The charter, these charter provisions became effective in January of 17, I think, because they were passed in November of 16. So we have until 2023 to do this, but we need to find out what this is gonna cost. And I think I understand Mr. Walther sat on the charter commission, but this is the language that's there.
Yeah.
So I think that we need to move along to some other topics, but I think that's what we need to ask is, Jamie, if you can work with them to
Yeah.
come up with what a cost would be, we'll have to plug it into a future budget.
And maybe to kind of narrow it down, I'll get with you and Mark or Tara, and we can talk through questions that you guys would want council to
Right.
define, in the scope of service. In essence, it's gonna be an agreed upon procedures.
Yeah.
Do you want A or B? Be like a takeout menu. What things are you wanting to do? Are you wanting to do utility alone, or is it just the governmental side of the business? Is it both?
It says all accounts.
It says all.
It says
So-
all.
But I'm sure there will be options that council will need to consider.
I think
So-
that's a good approach for us to talk to them and say, hey, if you guys looked at this, what are some of the considerations? And we can bring that back
And
to
bring
this
back
committee
some-
and and start to scope out what it is gonna
Right,
be.
so anyway, okay. Anybody else have any discussion on this terminal control?
Thanks for
review?
coming.
Yeah,
Just one more question before.
Sure.
When you talk about everything, so as far as like Joe Smith getting billed for sewer, is that every single sewer bill that you want a control test on? Everything like that, cause it
That's
can
what-
get really big.
That's what I'm talking about. We'll
Yeah,
need to-
our charter's available online on the city website, so it's 6.02E is
Yep.
the relative section. So
Okay.
I'd encourage you to download that, take a look at it, take it to your folks and see what they have to say. We may have to get Mr. Zetz involved as our law director to tell us how this may be interpreted, but this has a potential to be a very, very, very expensive proposition, so,
Yeah.
okay.
It'll be a resource issue for them
Yes,
as well.
Exactly, that's what I mean.
So we
It's-
need to
it's
make
gonna
sure
be-
we
so
can
this is a big deal.
Fit it in
Okay.
between our audit and before
Well-
the schools start.
Can I ask one more quick question? And I don't mean this in any derogatory manner, but do we have to use the same, would it make sense, and I don't know what size you guys are, but you were talking about resources, does it make sense to look at a bigger firm to possibly be able to do that one?
The
And
only-
just throw it out there
The
as an
only
idea.
reason why I would not, and bigger firm has the resources, yes. But if these guys are already, they have our work papers, they have the audit, so things that have already been tested and checked, in theory, they wouldn't need to retest those
I
things.
fully understand. I'm just,
So there would probably be some savings there.
There's
Okay.
nothing saying that we must use them, but there's a benefit to
If-
some savings.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah.
the main
Nothing
reason why.
saying that we
I
have
guess I
to
was
use
looking
them.
at it maybe in the opposite way. If they come back and say, we have no way of doing this,
Agreed.
then we can find
Yeah,
somebody else.
yeah.
No,
No.
that's understandable.
Because this is outside the scope of our audit contract through the auditor's page.
And we certainly would be looking for that honesty if that's it. that you
Okay.
guys just
Yeah,
can't do.
we would very upfront
All
about
right.
that, yeah, if that would be too much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys
Appreciate
coming
your
in, thanks.
Next thing, health insurance transition update.
Yeah, things are going along really well. All the employees, a few little hiccups here and there, but by and large, everyone now has their insurance card, got it before the first of the year. They also have their HRA card, which will be used to pay for the prescription costs. Those will be funded on the 20th. There's a little lag in getting them funded just because of the last minute nature and getting everything done in time. So, by and large, we've been very pleased with the response we've gotten from the consortium. UMR is the network, but basically it's the transition. They've been very communicative and worked very well with us, so we've been really pleased.
Any news on the run out claims and the holdovers that we may have to end up paying?
Yeah, the run out, we have we've processed the payment for the initial funding, the $131,000 that needed to fund the run out claims. So that's been done. We have received 2 checks from Ohio Insurance Services, our previous group. When the city funds the deductible, whether it's $1,500, $3,000, whatever it is, and you multiply it times the number of employees, there's a pot of money that goes to pay the deductible claims. About half our employees never touch the deductible or never get through it all. We received a total of $60,000, give or take a few bucks here or there, for 2015 and 2016. Those are being distributed to the funds where the run-out claims are coming from in the same percentages. And then we would expect to maybe get another 30 back for 17. So hopefully we have 90,000 to offset coming into the funds to offset, you know, the run-out claims. And again, the run-out claim isn't a firm number. It could be more or less depending on what our claims history is. That's an actuarial estimate.
Okay. Well, just keep us posted on that, please. If
Will
there's
do.
any issues. I think Mr. Walter had, Mr. Walter, Mr.
No,
Gall?
you hit my question exactly.
Okay, next thing, property casualty liability insurance.
Yeah, on the agenda tonight, we have the resolution authorizing the city administrator to sign the agreement with the Ohio plan for our 2018-2019 renewal. On each of your desks there, I provided the same analysis that we've given in my report. At the end of the day, our premiums dropped by about 5%, so year over year, we're pleased. We've had some, you know, similar to if you get a speeding ticket or you have an accident, when those start to fall off after 3 years or 4 years. So we had some of those types of experiences fall off, and our claims, we're better managing our claims now. Smaller ticket items, we're just, you know, we're not submitting those for claims, but maintaining those. So yeah, so 5% reduction. We were pleased to see that.
Good. No, that's good work on part of the city to operate safely and, you know, reduce vehicle accidents and be better handled. Mr. Walter?
Jada, when we talked about the budget, we had talked about, or during the budget discussion, you and I talked about the additional cost for legal coverage. And that, I believe you explained to me, was in this property casualty, and liability. Did we see any kind of increase on that? I see under the additional liability limits, which I imagine is where that would fall. It doesn't seem to have changed at all. Is there another category where that possibly would have fallen other than general liability?
Well, public officials could be where, I mean, that's another place where it might have fallen.
Okay.
But again, remember, a lot of those, the ones we got hit last year, those are still out there as placeholders in our experience, so they don't represent an increase or a decrease. They're still in our kind of a placeholder.
I see. So these were increased, so 2017 shows that increase as a placeholder.
Yeah, because the
I got
legal actions were being taken,
Okay.
and so they put aside, there's a placeholder for a certain amount of money, and it's still there, so it's not an increase or decrease,
So 5% decrease may not be exactly what we see. We may see a 10% decrease, or we may see a 0% decrease.
Well, it's definitely gonna be a 5% decrease. I mean, that's what the premium will be for this year.
Okay.
But next year, if those disappear like this year, they fall off, we could see another decline as well.
Conversely, if they skyrocket, we might say a 5% increase.
Yeah,
You can see
absolutely.
it the other way. Okay. I just wondered where that
Yeah.
was in here.
Yeah.
Anybody else on that, on number 3, Mr. Powell, anything? No, good, okay, number 4, preliminary 2017 financial results.
Yeah, we've closed the books. Everybody should have gotten the comprehensive financial report. Great news is all funds ended the year about $3 million unencumbered balance greater than what we had budgeted. Now that's utility and that's, you know, governmental as well, so it's across the board. And a big part of that obviously is, you know, it's a combination of a number of things. Revenue came in pretty much on target where we expected it to be. Expenses, you know, there were a number of projects, for example, that may not have been tackled this year or got delayed, or, you know, expenses that weren't spent. We always build in a little bit of a cushion in the budget, but not that much. I mean, we ended the year quite well. As an example, the street fund ended up with about $450,000 higher than we were originally projecting. Some of that's, for example, we didn't need to buy as much salt. You know, when you have those big type of expenditures, that does help you. Police fund was about $260,000. You know, I think they didn't spend some money on cruisers and the like. Water and sewer combined, they were about 1.2 million higher than budget. One of the issues we have with utility, and it's on the revenue side, is it's hard to estimate tap fees. because they're big dollar and they move the needle, but you don't know if you're gonna get 10 large tap fees or none. You know, so what you don't wanna do is budget, oh, we'll get 10 tap fees, and you get one, and then you're upside down. And so we tend to budget fairly conservatively in the utility for that reason on the revenue side. Nate does a really good job of managing the spending side. They generally come in pretty tight to what they're asking for. So by and large, the year ended very, very well. We've already started to work towards the financial statements, getting the initial schedules working. The other side of their house that helps us with our CAFR, doing all the analysis on accrued wages, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and going through that process. So we'll be doing that probably for the next 2 to 3 months, probably through late March will be that part. And then the financial statement audit, they'll probably be in probably sometime in late February for their initial cash work. And that's where they go through and they do a lot of this testing, right? So they have access to our accounting system, and then they go through and they monitor, they find the transactions, and they make sure that they can tick and tie them through the accounting system on the bank statement and all the other subsystems. So progressing down that path, and that's it for 2017 for the moment.
Hey, Mr. Walter, you got anything on?
Yeah, I'm trying to do the math here real quick in my head, so I'm writing it down here. You say it's $3 million difference between what was, I mean, I don't have your formal budget, I'm looking at your report, so I kind of took the four different.
The final, the sheet that looked like this in my report, the all funds balance in the bottom right hand corner was projecting it to be 10,346,000, and we actually ended up at 13,051.
Okay,
So it's 2.7.
and that was emailed to us?
Yeah, it's on the website too.
Yeah, I didn't.
So that,
If I can get a hard copy of that, that'd be awesome.
okay.
Yeah, that'd be great, okay, thanks.
Anything else on that item, Mr. Powell? Anything? Good, all right. Number 5, the accounting clerk position.
Yeah, again, it's on the agenda for tonight for continued discussion. One of the things that council had asked for, or you had asked for, was a staffing plan. There's we wanna make sure we're giving you what the form you're looking for. An initial cut of a staffing plan I put on the desk tonight. I guess we were looking for some direction, if that's what the group as a whole is looking for, or more or less, but
Well, that's nice, I appreciate the effort on that, but I think what Mrs. Carter and I were looking for was more of a justification for the accounting clerk, and I think she was comparing it to, what we had Mr. Powell do for the city planner, I believe, or excuse me, Mr. Fulton for the city planner. I was looking at Mr. Powell, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Nice work.
Well, I did a fairly lengthy analysis and sent it originally back in October and again when we had the first reading. So I'm not sure if there's something else you're looking for.
I'm looking, I don't recall getting that, so.
It put it on the dais at the last meeting, and it was.
He outlined all the duties that the department does and who would be doing which, so.
I'll go
You
back
know,
and look.
if that's, and maybe we can clarify that tonight during the second reading, the staffing plan I took as one thing. I talked to Tim Hicken about it, and, he talked about what positions are in the 5-year CIP,
Right.
pulling those out, but is it just the justification for clerk now based on
And
the similar study that?
I think I took it a different way, or I might have taken it the way you took it, which was kind of this projection of what the staffing will be needed as we continue to grow. Are we gonna need to add to, because you'd made the comment that we don't want these one-offs. We don't want, come with us with one person, but we don't know what the big picture is. And that's how I kind of took it, was, hey, what are gonna be the next?
Well, and I jumped fully into that until I talked to Tim, and he was like, "Oh, it's
No,
just." so.
I think we're, I'll look through my notes or paperwork and see what I have on what Jamie sent out. Maybe it just didn't register. So, but Mr. Walter's correct. It was really both. It was looking for, the council's request was, we want good justification for the accounting clerk, but then we don't want to have the drip of this year come to us with, we need an accounting clerk, then 2019 comes to us when we need another service department worker, and there's no coordination.
And that's what this document that
Okay.
was on the
Right.
desk tonight,
Right.
it proposed to do for the next 5 years. It has total positions, which would be bodies in
Mhm.
those positions, and total FTE, because you may have 2 part-time, which equal 1 full-time. And this was a first cut, and we really have to spend more time with the police department and the departments
Sure.
to flesh out what they're thinking.
Let's roll.
Is this what what Mr.
Hicken had described as what's in the CIP? Or is this what you guys would project as, hey, we see this coming, we see this being needed? For instance, I'm gonna use the park and recreation. You've got one person in there for the next 5 years. Do you actually think it's gonna be one person for the next 5 years, or do you think it's gonna be one person, then 1.5 people, then 2 people, then 2.5 people? You know, you think it's gonna grow over the next 5 to 7 years, you know, in that manner? Or is this kind of what's in the,
What I would like to do if, you know, what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but it sounds like we're having 2 paths here. One is looking at the accounting clerk and, you know, dealing with that as we are now. But beyond that, looking at getting rid of these one-off approach, where we bring something and looking at, you know, all of these and having justification of why we have them and having, you know, I'll tell you, I jumped fully into the full-fledged staffing plan after the last meeting and getting stats from departments and trying to justify doing that. I was going down that path and, then we talked and, you know, take it out of the budget. So it sounds to me like there are 2 different paths happening here. Maybe I'm wrong. One path is the accounting clerk, and we're talking about doing it, and not necessarily that the discussion about doing one-offs necessarily relates to that, but also looking at the future when we bring these things, how are we gonna handle them? So when we bring it to the budget and it's in here, we can say, hey, look, you know, turn to page 6 in the staffing plan, it's there.
I can say this, we're talking to Mrs. Carter after the meeting, I mean, the accounting clerk was the genesis of this. We don't want this year, so we want something like this, just like the CIP that says, in 2019, you're gonna need to buy a dump truck, and we're gonna pave 2 streets, and we're gonna have to build build a bigger product building or whatever. So we can see it all sort of laid out. We're gonna do something more with parks or what have you. We would want the CIP for you to come, for service to come say, we need a new dump truck. We don't know what we're gonna need next year, we need a new dump truck this year. And then next year, so that's, yes, so there are 2 paths, and I think you're both on the right, from my perspective, you're both on the right path.
That's great
This is-
clarification,
This draft is just a draft, we're gonna start working, you gotta talk with the police department, obviously that's important, because they are the biggest budget driver.
But
Okay.
I want to have this in front of you so you can at least see if
Yes,
this is
exactly, no,
what
this, this, to me,
Great
is off to a good
conversation.
start, yes.
Appreciate it.
No, I'm,
what does FTE mean? I'm sorry.
Full-time
full-time equivalent.
Full-time
Or
equivalent, okay.
equivalent.
If you work 40-hour work week times 52 weeks
Gotcha.
here, it's 2,080 hours.
Mr. Powell?
Yeah, I think this is what I had in my head, but maybe just not necessarily justification, but just how you came to these numbers, so we can, you know, a better idea of what you're seeing when we, instead, because we just see the numbers and we can say, okay, well, you know,
Yeah,
in
okay, you need
2020
3.
you're gonna need another person in the finance department. It's just kind of how you guys came to this,
That,
into these.
this has certainly clarified it. Appreciate it.
Anything else on the accounting clerk? Okay. Police station finance update.
Yeah, you guys all got a copy of this on your desk tonight. It's a draft term sheet. It is, we are proceeding down the path. It'll be issued tomorrow, probably tomorrow afternoon, to the banks that are listed on there. And it'll be public, so anybody else who sees it or wants it can get it. But what'll happen is they'll have 2 weeks to respond. Most will respond fairly quickly. Part of the schedule would have us, and I apologize, I printed off the schedule, but I left it up on the copier, I think. Or did I give it to you guys? Maybe I did. Oh, I gave it to you guys, that's that. There was a timeline that looks like this. The goal would be to go through the bank placement. It's the easiest, it's the fastest, it'll get us our money probably the most quickly and cost effectively. So the goal would be, if all this falls into place on or before February 20th, we'd have the $4.6 million. We will most likely know by a week from tomorrow if there's either the big players who we would expect to offer, don't offer, or we'll reach out to them, say, are you planning to offer, to put in a bid? And if they say, no, we're not interested, then we'll know pretty quickly if we're gonna have to go through a public offering. And so if by next week, around this time, we believe that we're gonna have a public offering, we'll start those steps to get the offering statement, or the official statement ready. So we're not waiting till the very end to try to get jump started. We don't wanna necessarily invest a lot of effort in something that isn't gonna be needed, but we'll know by next week. So, long story short, I think if all goes according to plan, by the third week of February, we should have the funds in hand, if we can go ahead and placement.
Park National Bank is misspelled.
That's my typing, so.
Just, I don't want them to be offended.
That's cool. Yeah.
Thanks, Jamie, thanks for laying that out. Just keep us posted again on what's going on with this, what you find out. Anybody have any questions on the police, the financing of the police station? No? Okay. Andy? Oh.
I don't.
Okay, I'll let you, okay. Mr. Powell, anything on police finance?
I don't know if you have put out any kind of like feeler or anything like that, if you think that banks will be receptive to it, or?
Prior to 1/1, we had a couple banks that were very aggressive and wanting to do this. With the taxability of, the ability to deduct and things like that, it becomes a little bit trickier issue. So the question is, is there appetite there? I think there is from everything I'm hearing, but proof's in the pudding when you get the bids and see if they're, one of the things that we've explicitly, working with bond counsel, Dennis Schwally, who's our bond counsel, and has been bond counsel for quite some time, and our advisor, making sure that, these notes are, or, these bonds or notes, whatever they are not adjustable. It is what it is, regardless, if the tax law changes, that's on the bank. So, we're trying to protect our interest.
Well, Jamie, the interest on these will be is tax exempt. That did not change with the new
Correct.
tax law.
But one of the things you run into is, if people don't, if the taxing issue isn't as big of an issue, if they don't itemize their deductions, if they don't necessarily need a non-taxable yield, they can take a taxable yield. It just, what kind of clients' books they can put it into.
Right, well, okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Mr. King?
Yeah, what we'll do is next week, whenever we start to get an indication, get information out to council about it.
Absolutely.
That sounds great, okay. Anything on police financing from anybody? And then, is any other business? Anybody have anything else for the committee? All right, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Kathy, would you call the roll, please?
Barstow,
Yes,
Powell,
Yes.
Walter,
Yes.
we're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks for moving the meeting back to 6:15.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we just barely made it.